The door hissed shut behind him, sealing out the city's cacophony and locking him into a world of chilled, sterile air and the quiet hum of exclusion. For a single, heart-stopping moment, he was invisible. Not Marcus Jones, visionary founder and CEO of a burgeoning tech empire, but just another black man in a place that screamed he didn't belong. His eyes, sharp and analytical, swept the showroom of AuraTech. It was his creation, his brainchild. Every sleek monitor, every ergonomic chair, every glowing logo on the wall had been born from a sketch on his tablet, a late-night idea fueled by ambition and a desperate desire to build something better. He knew the cost of every component, the profit margin on every extended warranty, the very blueprint of the air conditioning system above, and yet, standing here now, he felt like an intruder. His gaze landed on the two employees behind the pristine white counter. A young man, maybe 22, with meticulously gelled hair and a practiced, vacant smile, was lazily swiping on his phone. A few feet away, a woman with a severe blonde ponytail was meticulously arranging brochures, her movements sharp and efficient. Marcus took a deliberate step forward, his worn sneakers silent on the polished concrete floor. The movement was a trigger. The young man's eyes flicked up from his phone. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Instead, they performed a rapid, brutal assessment. They scanned the simple hoodie, the jeans faded from wear, not design, the lack of a conspicuous luxury watch. The smile tightened, becoming a thin, dismissive line. He gave a barely perceptible shake of his head and looked back at his screen, his body language erecting an invisible, impermeable barrier. The air left Marcus's lungs in a quiet, shocked rush. This was it. The moment he'd feared, hypothesized about in boardrooms, the reason for this entire charade. It wasn't a theory in a diversity report anymore. It was a cold, hard fact, delivered with a silent, casual cruelty that was far more powerful than any shouted slur. The foundation of his own company, and he was being deemed unworthy to stand on it. The experiment had begun, and the first result was a devastating failure. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus Jones sat at the head of a vast mahogany table, sunlight glinting off the skyline of the city he was slowly conquering. Around him, his leadership team, a diverse, sharp group of individuals, debated the Q3 numbers. AuraTech was a success story, a darling of the tech retail world. They prided themselves on a culture of inclusivity, on their open door, open mind motto plastered across every onboarding document, but Marcus had a nagging feeling, a splinter in his mind he couldn't ignore. It was the anonymous reviews that first caught his attention, buried in the less helpful section of their site. Phrases like felt unwelcome, staff seemed busy, will probably shop online next time. Most were dismissed as isolated incidents, the standard grumblings of difficult customers. But Marcus noticed a pattern the algorithms didn't, the demographics of the reviewers. Then came the internal metrics. Store number 7, located in the upscale North Crest district, had significantly lower sales of high-margin accessories and warranties. The data showed that foot traffic was strong, but the conversion rate for certain customer profiles was abysmal. The store manager, a man named David, had offered vague explanations about shifting market trends and increased online competition. But Marcus, who had built his empire on data and gut instinct, felt the disconnect. The numbers told a story of lost opportunities, but his intuition whispered a darker, more insidious truth about why those opportunities were being lost. He proposed an audit, not of the books, but of the culture. He wanted to go undercover. The board was hesitant, fearing bad PR, but Marcus was adamant. "We can't fix what we won't see," he'd said, his voice low and firm. "I need to see it for myself. Not as the CEO, but as just another customer." And so, the CEO shed his skin. The tailored Tom Ford suit was replaced by a generic gray hoodie and old jeans. The Rolex was left in a drawer, replaced by a simple fitness tracker. He drove his own car, a decade-old sedan, instead of the chauffeured town car, to the North Crest location. He was no longer Marcus Jones. He was just Marcus. A man walking into a store to buy a laptop for his fictional nephew's birthday. He rehearsed his story in the rearview mirror, smoothing out the cadence of his speech, softening the confident, commanding tone he used in the boardroom into something more tentative. He felt a strange vulnerability, a stripping away of the armor that his title and success provided. As he walked from the parking lot, his shoulders instinctively hunched slightly, a preemptive defense against a judgment he hadn't even received yet. He was preparing for a possibility, a fear. He never imagined the reality would be so immediate, so visceral, and so utterly demoralizing. The dismissal from the young man, whose name tag read Jake, was a physical blow. Marcus stood rooted to the spot for a moment, the cheerful electronic music of the store suddenly sounding like a taunt. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind he took before a major acquisition pitch, and decided to engage. He approached the counter. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Jake looked up again, an exaggerated sigh puffing his cheeks. "Yeah, I'm looking for a laptop for my nephew." "Gaming, probably. Mid-range budget." He kept his request simple, direct. Jake's eyes did that quick, dismissive scan again. "The specs are on the tags," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the floor with his chin before looking back at his phone. "All the prices are there too." The woman with the ponytail, Sarah according to her tag, didn't even look up from her brochures. Her silence was a louder endorsement of Jake's behavior than any words could be. Marcus felt a hot flush of anger rise up his neck. He forced it down. Observe. Document. Don't react, right. But I was hoping for some advice. On the graphics cards, maybe? The difference between the RTX 3050 and 3060? This was a test. A basic question any AuraTech employee should be able to answer enthusiastically. Jake snorted, a short, derisive sound. "Look, man, if you have to ask, you probably don't need the 3060. The ones on the floor are what we have. Take a look." He then turned his back completely, muttering something to Sarah that Marcus couldn't hear. She offered a thin, complicit smile. Marcus was being managed. Not served, not assisted, but managed out of the store. He was being treated as a time waster, a potential shoplifter, a problem to be minimized. The message was clear. Your presence here is a burden. Your questions are an annoyance. Leave. He turned away from the counter, his heart hammering against his ribs. He walked slowly through the aisles, pretending to look at products while his mind raced. He noticed everything. The way Jake's posture instantly straightened, and his vacant smile reappeared as a white couple in business attire walked in. He heard the effusive, knowledgeable pitch Jake launched into just moments after dismissing him. He saw Sarah glide over to them, offering to bring out sealed units from the back, a service she hadn't even hinted at for him. He was a ghost in his own house. He spent 20 minutes in the store, a lifetime of humiliation. He picked up a graphics card, and Jake's eyes were instantly on him, tracking his movement with a hawk-like intensity he hadn't shown when actually being asked for help. He lingered near a display of high-end headphones, and Sarah coincidentally came over to reorganize the shelf next to him, her presence a not-so-subtle warning. Every microaggression was a paper cut, and he was bleeding out from 1,000 tiny wounds. The constant surveillance, the denial of service, the withholding of knowledge, the preferential treatment given to others in blatant, real-time comparison. It was a masterclass in how to make someone feel subhuman without ever raising your voice or using a single discriminatory slur. It was systemic racism in its most insidious, polite, and efficient form, a protocol of exclusion executed perfectly by two oblivious employees. The emotional weight was crushing. This was more than a business problem, it was a profound personal betrayal. He had built this company to be a meritocracy, a place where passion for tech was the only currency that mattered. He thought his success was a beacon, proof that the old barriers could be torn down. But standing here, invisible and disrespected, he realized the barriers weren't just still standing. His own employees were dutifully, diligently manning them. The final straw was the couple. Marcus watched as Jake completed the sale with the white couple, a top-tier laptop, the expensive headphones he'd been eyeing, a premium warranty, everything. Jake was laughing, jovial, a completely different person. As he handed them their large, heavy bag, he said, "You folks have a fantastic day now. Don't hesitate to call me directly if you need anything." He slid his business card across the counter with a flourish. The couple left, buzzing with the satisfaction of excellent service. Marcus saw his opening. The counter was clear. He walked back up, the worn rubber of his sneakers squeaking on the floor. Jake's smile vanished the second he turned and saw who it was. His face settled back into its default state of impatient boredom. "Yes?" Jake asked, the word dripping with fatigue. "I'd like to buy this," Marcus said, his voice quiet but clear. He placed the graphics card he'd been holding on the counter. It was a high-end model, a $900 item. Jake looked at the box, then back at Marcus. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched out. Sarah stopped her organizing and watched, her arms crossed. "You sure about that?" Jake asked, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Quite sure," Marcus replied, his gaze steady. Jake picked up the box as if it were contaminated. "You know, this isn't a card you just plug in. You need a compatible power supply, the right motherboard. It's not a toy." The implication hung in the air, and someone like you wouldn't understand that. "I'm aware of the system requirements," Marcus said, each word measured and precise, a hint of the steel beneath the hoodie finally beginning to show. "I'd like to purchase it," Jake sighed, as if the request was the most unreasonable thing he'd heard all day. He made no move to scan the item. "Look, it's a big purchase. Maybe you should think about it. Talk to your nephew." He said the word nephew with a sarcastic twist, clearly not believing the story for a second. That was it. The absolute, final line. The refusal to take his money. The assumption that he was either a criminal, a fool, or too poor to afford the item. The sheer, unadulterated audacity, the calm that settled over Marcus was not one of peace, but of terrifying, focused clarity. The experiment was over. The data was conclusive. He slowly reached into the back pocket of his jeans. Jake tensed, his eyes widening slightly, perhaps expecting a wallet or something else. But what Marcus pulled out was a simple, black leather bifold. He opened it. Not to the cash compartment, but to a clear ID window. He placed it on the counter next to the graphics card and slid it across the smooth surface toward Jake. There was no driver's license in the window. Instead, there was a pristine white card. At the top was the familiar AuraTech logo. In the center, in bold, black letters, was his name, Marcus Jones. And beneath it, a single, devastating word, founder and CEO. The color drained from Jake's face so completely it was as if someone had pulled the plug. His jaw went slack. His eyes, which had been so full of lazy arrogance moments before, bulged with pure, undiluted terror. He looked from the ID to Marcus's face, now seeing him not as a black man in a hoodie, but as the man whose picture was on the wall in the break room, the man who signed his paychecks, the man who owned every single atom of the world he was standing in. "What? Mr. Jones. I didn't. The words tumbled out, a choked, incoherent stammer. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into a display of cables and sending it clattering to the floor. The sound was explosively loud in the silent store. Sarah, her face a mask of horrified confusion, took a step closer, her eyes frantically scanning the ID. When she understood, her hand flew to her mouth, and a small, pathetic gasp escaped. The blood rushed to her face, then left it just as quickly, leaving her as pale as the white countertop she gripped for support. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, his posture finally straight, the weight of his true identity settling back onto his shoulders like a mantle. The invisible man had just become the most terrifyingly visible person in the room. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation, more powerful than any outburst. It was the sound of a world ending, Jake and Sarah's world, and they were only just beginning to realize it. Marcus finally moved. With a deliberate slowness that was more intimidating than any sudden gesture, he reached out and retrieved his CEO badge, slipping it back into his pocket. He left the graphics card sitting on the counter, a monument to their catastrophic failure. "Get David down here," he said, his voice low. It wasn't a request. It was a command, uttered with an authority that brooked no argument. It was the voice of the boardroom, and it sounded utterly alien in the retail space. Jake, trembling, fumbled for the store phone, his fingers slipping twice before he could dial the manager's extension. His voice was a high-pitched whisper. "David, you need to come to the front. Now. Right now." It's urgent. Minutes later, the manager, David, a man in his 40s with a harried expression, emerged from the back office. What's all the noise about? Jake, why is that on the floor? He stopped dead when he saw Marcus. The recognition was instant, followed by a wave of confusion at the clothing, then a dawning, gut-wrenching dread as he absorbed the scene, the ashen faces of his employees, the CEO standing in silence, and the expensive graphics card abandoned on the counter. Marcus, Mr. Jones, what a surprise. I wasn't told you were visiting today. David began, his voice strained with forced cheerfulness. I'm sure you weren't, Marcus interrupted, his tone glacial. My visit was unannounced. For obvious reasons. He gestured to Jake and Sarah, who looked like they were awaiting execution. We will have a meeting. In your office. Now. You two, he said, turning his gaze to the employees, will wait here. Do not move. Do not speak to each other. The meeting in David's office was brief and brutal. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the facts, moment by moment, interaction by interaction. He described the initial dismissal, the denied service, the condescending advice, the tracking, the stark contrast in service, and finally, the refusal to process a sale. David's face cycled through denial, excuse-making, and finally, a sickened acceptance. He tried to blame inadequate training, but Marcus shut it down. This wasn't a training failure, David. This is a character failure. You hired them. You managed them. You are responsible for the culture in this store. And the culture you have fostered is one of systemic bias and exclusion. You looked at the numbers I sent you and you saw a business problem. I walked your floor today and lived the human cost. Back in the showroom, Marcus faced Jake and Sarah. He didn't fire them on the spot. That would have been too easy, too simple an absolution. Instead, he looked at them, these architects of his humiliation, and saw not monsters, but products of a broken system they didn't even know they were perpetuating. You two will be suspended, pending a full investigation by HR, he stated, his voice echoing in the silent store. But before you go, I want you to understand something. For the last 40 minutes, you weren't just failing at your jobs. You were actively undermining everything this company is supposed to stand for. You looked at me and you didn't see a customer. You didn't see a tech enthusiast. You saw a stereotype. You saw a threat. You saw a problem. Your actions today were a quiet, efficient form of violence. You didn't need hate in your hearts to do immense damage. All you needed was indifference, assumption, and unexamined bias. He paused, letting the words sink in. I built AuraTech from my garage. I sold my car to fund the first production run. I did that not just to sell gadgets, but to create a space where the only thing that matters is a shared passion for innovation. Today, you showed me that in my own store, the color of my skin matters more than my passion, my money, or my humanity. The following weeks saw a company-wide earthquake. Store number 7 was closed for a week 4 mandatory cultural retraining, led by Marcus himself. Jake and Sarah were terminated after the investigation, which uncovered a pattern of similar behavior noted in other anonymous complaints. David was demoted and transferred, but Marcus knew firing a few employees wasn't a solution. It was a symptom treatment. The disease was deeper. He overhauled HR policies, implementing truly anonymous feedback systems and mandatory, immersive bias training that focused on microaggressions and systemic exclusion, not just overt racism. He established a mystery shopper program that specifically audited for equitable service across demographics. Promotion was now tied to demonstrated inclusive leadership. The story doesn't end with a neat, happy bow. The wound was deep. Sometimes, Marcus would still walk into one of his stores, even in a suit, and catch a flicker of that same look from a new employee, a momentary hesitation that told him the battle was far from over. He had learned a painful, invaluable lesson. That racism isn't always a cross-burning on a lawn. Sometimes, it's a cold, dismissive glance across a counter. It's not always in the shout of a supremacist, it's often in the silent, complicit shuffle of brochures by a colleague. It is a system that operates efficiently, politely, and devastatingly, even within institutions built to oppose it. He had set out to audit his store, but he ended up auditing the very fabric of the world he thought he'd changed. He realized that building a company was one thing, but building a truly equitable culture was a continuous, conscious fight, a fight that required him to first be unseen, and unheard, and disrespected, to truly understand what he was up against. So, I leave you with this. The next time you walk into a store, a restaurant, an office, and you are greeted with a smile, your presence welcomed and your business valued, ask yourself one simple question. Is this the universal experience? Or is your reality a privileged one, built on a foundation of silent exclusions you will never have to see? The Jakes and Sarahs of the world aren't just characters in a story. They are everywhere. And the real question is, what are we going to do to make sure they don't get to write the ending?